Welcome back. The final results of Lesotho's poll could be known tomorrow. This after significant progress was made in the vote counting today. Only 4 constituencies are yet to declare their results. Prime Minister Tom Tabane's party, the ABC, leads with 40 constituencies and Pagadita Musisidi's DC has 33, while the LCD and BNP has 2 and 1 respectively. Meanwhile, election observer missions have declared Lesotho's elections free, fair and credible. But it would seem security issues that have plagued the tiny kingdom for months will haunt them for a while longer. Mission heads warned that while an advance team found that the environment was conducive for holding elections, the politicized security has to be monitored. We now cross live to our contributing editor Vuyo Mvoko in Maseru, Lesotho, for a roundup of the elections in that country. Vuyo, good evening and thank you so much for joining us. What's the latest on the polls?
Well, it's exactly what you've just read, Lulu, that indeed there's only 4 more constituencies left before the result is known. But it will not be a final result. In other words, when they finish, once they submit the remaining constituencies, there will still have to be an allocation of the proportional representation part of this election, which is a bit of a complicated system if you really you haven't been part of it. Well, we had hoped to bring you someone who knows this system and who can articulate it better than most people here in Lesotho. Unfortunately, it was not to be. That person could not make it this evening. But essentially what is going to happen is, even though Prime Minister Tabane's party, the ABC, is and if you were to put them together with one of his allies, they would get an outright majority. From the numbers, the way they stand now, it's not as simple as that. It doesn't mean that he is going to go ahead and form a government. But that proportional representation system is going to dilute the numbers quite significantly, because one of the things it does, apparently, it's to ensure that those who have a strong national presence and who have had a healthy showing throughout the country do get rewarded. In other words, it's not a question of simply the person who has the most votes then gets allocated the proportional, like a number that's proportionate to what they have in terms of the constituencies that they have won. It's much, much more complicated than that. But as I say, the person who was going to explain that couldn't make it this evening. So after the tally of the 4 remaining constituencies is done, hopefully tomorrow, what will then happen is there will be that allocation, after which a final result and a final allocation of the 120 parliamentary seats would then be done. But from what people are telling us here, it is still going to be a hung parliament, which would mean that the parties themselves would then have to enter into conversations. There's going to be a lot of wheeling and dealing. We don't know yet where that is going to end up. Lulu?
Now, Vuyo, with regard, you mentioned in the beginning that not necessarily that we will be getting the final results tomorrow. What sort of results are we looking at getting?
I'm battling to hear you. I couldn't hear your question, but
Vuyo,
perhaps an important fact to add is that from what we've picked up there, political parties have already begun to sort of have preliminary discussions among themselves, looking at you know, who they could possibly go to bed with, the implications of that. And as you know, with coalitions, there's going to be a lot of wheeling and dealing. And that is why, right from the onset, parties had expressed not so much of a keenness, but like their reservations, you know, about going into coalitions, because coalitions, by their very nature, sort of come with a lot of compromises. There are inherent limitations, especially when you're bringing together people who are not willing partners, but who are brought together by circumstances, as was the case with the current coalition whose term is now coming to an end. The very coalition, in fact, that is responsible for the crisis that Lesotho found itself in and ended up going into an election prematurely.
Now, Vuyo, in terms of time frames, what sort of time frames should we look at with regards to the final election results from Lesotho, inclusive of the coalitions that may be formed and the discussions that some of the parties are going through currently?
Well, it's not a great deal of time from what we understand once the results are announced. And that was one of the problems the last time, because even though because there are people who argued that perhaps if the parties were given a lot more time to actually find one another and reach you know, the sort of compromises that would have ensured that like-minded parties went into the coalition that collapsed, maybe Lesotho would not be where it is today. But unfortunately, the person who has sort of an intimate knowledge of that and who would have really dissected it for us couldn't make it this evening. And frankly, I'm not in a position to actually you know, make these issues any clearer for you this evening. But we do hope that tomorrow evening we will be bringing him and these issues will be clarified. Lulu?
Vuyo, thank you so much for joining us. That was our contributing editor, Vuyo Mvoko, joining us from Maseru in Lesotho.